Recently, Jim Lee said something that caught a lot of people's attention, that American comics can actually learn from manga. He was talking about genre diversity and the fact that manga culturally is treated more like literature in the East, something anyone can read at any age. While Western comics have largely locked themselves into superheroes and being for children. And when someone like Jim Lee says that out loud, it kinda matters. When I was going for my animation degree back in 2010, a lot, if not all of my professors at the time were really discouraged us from engaging with Japanese media at all, calling it trash and that it was really cheap, and if we wanted jobs in the industry, we couldn't draw like that and we needed to stick to something more like a Western style of drawing, which is really odd as they showed us a lot of Miyazaki's work because we totally had to write a report on Spirited Away in college. So it's really interesting to see the legendary Jim Lee say that American comics can learn from manga. It's honestly really refreshing to hear Jim Lee talk about manga with an open mind, and this conversation hasn't popped up out of nowhere. It's been going on for a long time, at least 20 years from what I remember hearing and reading. Comic sales have been declining for a long time as well, while manga sales have clearly been increasing, and at this point manga just makes up majority of those readers. And I'll be straight up, I like both. I like movies, TV shows, animation, video games, pretty much all media. I genuinely believe you can learn something from studying anything, so this was never a manga versus comics thing for me. That's why it's good to see someone in Jim Lee's position at least acknowledging the situation. If comics are going to evolve at all, it probably has to start with people at the top. He is the president of one of the, big three comic companies after all. As someone who wants to break into the industry, and as a consumer who honestly is pretty frustrated with the industry, this gives me a bit of hope. But if we're going to talk about hope, we also need to be honest about what the actual issues are with American comics. One of the biggest points Jim Lee ends up bringing up is genre diversity. Manga can be about anything, slice of life, sports, romance, weird experimental stuff, you name it. There's a manga for it. Mainstream American comics, on the other hand, are overwhelmingly about superheroes and crime fighting, which I love that stuff, don't get me wrong. But other genres do exist, but they're not as pushed into the mainstream. Another issue that he didn't really touch upon is accessibility. Comics are still largely tied to comic book stores, and not every city has one. And if you don't live near one, you're kind of just ordering online. Manga, on the other hand, is everywhere. Barnes and Nobles, Books a Millions, regular bookstores, you can just walk in and grab it. And yes, you can find single issues there sometimes, but trade paperbacks are way more common, which personally I prefer anyway. But that leads into another issue, value versus cost. Standard comic issue is about 22 to 24 pages and usually runs around $3.99 to $4.99. But manga volume is roughly 180 pages and for about $13. Now, to be fair, a manga volume is several chapters and a comic issue is technically just one chapter. So the most honest comparison is a trade paperback or an omnibus. But then you're talking anywhere from $20 to $80, which that is just a huge jump. And I understand why. Comics are made by teams, writers, pencilers, inkers, colorists, letterers, and manga is usually just a single mangaka and maybe a couple of assistants. And comics are also in full color, and good color printing is definitely not cheap. Another big thing is consistency. In manga, it's usually the same artist for the entire run. Their art style might evolve over time, but it's still their vision. In American comics, artists can change from issue to issue, and I think a lot of readers really struggle with that. Comics and manga are visual mediums. Art is the thing. Most of us pick something up because it looks cool. A good example for me is Ultimate Spider-Man back in the early 2000s. Mark Bagley straight up drew 111 issues straight, which is, it's legendary. It's amazing. And when he stepped down and like Stuart Immerman like took over, and I'll be honest, I was pretty disappointed by that. And that's it's not a knock on Immerman. He's an incredible artist too. I just really love Bagley's work. And he's one of my top 3 favorite artists of all time. And his artwork is what gravitated me to the book. Like, also, for comparison, Akira Toriyama's Dragon Ball was like 519 chapters. Back in the 90s, I actually think publishers understood this better. Artists were the headliners. Todd McFarlane drawing Spider-Man was a huge deal. And when he got his own book, people just showed up because they loved how he drew the character. I do think we need to go back to that, even though I completely understand that artists and writers want to move on creatively. New things are just exciting, and it's just part of being an artist. Another massive issue is how hard it is for new readers to just know where to start. If I want to start Naruto today, I could just pick up volume 1. That's it. Comics are not that simple. You got decades of lore, multiple number 1s that actually aren't really number 1, crossovers, and characters who have multiple books running all at the same time. So my ex tried getting into comics by reading Miss Marvel, and she got super frustrated because suddenly she had to read Spider-Man or Wolverine for things to actually make sense. It's not a linear reading experience. At the height of Spider-Man's popularity, there was 3 or 4 canon Spider-Man books running at once, and that's just not exactly welcoming. And shout out to the people who compile reading lists for comics. You guys are the real heroes. None of this is new. It's not even a hot take. It's just reality. I care about this debate because I don't want this medium to crumble. I think comics are an incredible art form. I'm dyslexic, and reading comics generally helped me get better at reading when I was younger. And it's also an amazing medium because the barrier to entry is relatively low. You don't need hundreds of people like you do for a movie, a TV show, or to make a video game. At its core, you just need a writer and an artist, and if you're lucky, you can be both. Even if you can't sell your work, you can still put it online for people to enjoy. I really believe comics do need to evolve if they want to survive, and I think the industry has been just stagnant for a long time. Do I think Jim Lee is going to single-handedly change everything? Probably not. But I do think he's being analytical and not reactionary. He knows this has been a problem for a long time. It's also a quiet admission that movies and TV shows aren't creating as many new comic readers as people hope. At least not in the way that anime has driven manga readership. And in the terms of clout and authority, there aren't many people bigger than Jim Lee. I don't know, maybe Robert Kirkman or something. And that makes this a huge deal. I think one of the biggest differences that manga is allowed to be broad, while mainstream American comics are just more superhero focused. If you look at something like webtoons, there's a healthy amount of non-superhero work, romance, slice of life, experimental stuff. I love something like Crow Time, which is literally just about dumpy little crows doing crow things. Historically, American comics weren't always like this before the Comics Code Authority. Romance and horror were massive. Tales from the Crypt, Joe Simon and Jack Kirby, creators of Captain America, also created a romance comic called Young Romance. There's probably a huge untapped audience there. Marvel and DC have been locked into this superhero business for a little too long, and honestly, a lot that can be traced back to the Comics Code Authority. I don't think the industry has really fully recovered from that. So yeah, I'm echoing what a lot of people have been saying for the last 20 years. Comics just need to evolve. I'm glad that some people at the top seem to realize that now, or at least willing to admit it. But realistically, real change is probably gonna have to come down to indie creators who aren't following the mold. And I say that as someone who's currently working on a superhero-esque comic. I also want to be clear, manga isn't perfect. Shonen in particular has issues with power scaling, for example. I love early Naruto, especially when the fights were about creativity, but towards the end it just turns into ninja wizards throwing bigger and bigger fireballs at each other. But still, that doesn't mean that there aren't lessons worth learning. Anyway, that's all I got for today. I'm Dane, and if you want to help support the channel, go check out another video. And I will see you next time.